Hi, and welcome back to the other side of the cell. This is Michael Jackson coming at you once again. I want to thank everybody for sharing, subscribing to this channel, and keeping it going. We're having a good time and exploring all the subjects that you're suggesting. You know, sometimes you take a look at your career and how it is uh, working with inmates. And working with inmates is just like working in any other profession. There's good and the bad and the ugly and all. So for me, working with inmates has always been a thing that has evolved over time. Um, when I first started in corrections, you're basically brainwashed and taught to be think that all inmates are horrible. They're all, pieces of shit, and you shouldn't give them nothing. And all these different things are kind of programmed into you as coming as, it's us versus them, and you know, they're all animals and things like that. And after you evolve through time, you understand that that is not true, and that there's good, bad, and ugly in everything. I mean, you're going to have good inmates, you're going to have bad inmates, you're going to have inmates that are just horrible human beings, or inmates that are just evil and should be put to death, or things like that. And they've done such horrible, horrible things that they deserve everything they get. And then you have some inmates that, they're just guys that made mistakes. And, you know, everybody is a 30-second decision away from going to prison, in my opinion. Everybody. In the right circumstance, if you're backed into the corner and, you have to make a decision, you might have to make a split decision that might have you end up in prison because you had to make that decision. And, um, you know, so, my experience working in corrections is, let's just take the good. So, you might be a young officer, you go in, you don't have any expectations. You might get uh, told by the older vet, the officer's been there 15, 20 years, and oh, these inmates are a piece of shit, they're this and they're that. You might get talked to by the disgruntled officer, the officer that hates his job. And then you might talk to a more professional, seasoned officer, and he might say, you just got to be level headed, treat each individual inmate, individually. You can't group them all into one group. And you'll get all these different things thrown at you, but you have to decide and you have to discover what works for you and what you're seeing. And you can't let people influence you and give you all this information and you just take it and say, I hate inmates, they're all evil, they're all pieces of shit. Because you never know, somebody in your family might go to prison, somebody you love might go to prison. And do you want them to be treated like shit just because they're an inmate? And the answer to most people is no, they wouldn't. So you develop that skill set over time. And if you are not a closed-minded person, then you will understand that that's the case. Not all inmates are horrible people. Now, there's also the bad working with inmates, and you will, if you work in segregation, or if you work in a high risk, a dorm with a bunch of, violent inmates, a bunch of inmates are always in trouble and things like that. And you might have those bad days where you're thinking, all these guys are freaking animals. I can't stand them. I hate their guts. They might cuss you. They might talk shit to you. They might swing on you. They might do things to you. So, the bad part of it is you might have those days where you run into inmates that they're just going to mess with you and mess with you and mess with you. And you just begin to develop a hatred and a callousness for them. And you got to understand that that's not them all. So, you're going to have to filter out those types of days and areas you might work with the other areas where you might have um, you know decent inmates that respect you, call you sir, and thank you for things and stuff like that. So the good and the bad that comes with it, and then you have the ugly, and the ugly is you might work a segregation unit or a unit where you got to be hands on. You got to go in and you got to use of force, and it's just a shit show all day long, and you come out smelling like blood and puke or something, and you might have to have a lot of high stress encounters with inmates and sometimes staff because you know as a staff person too, the good bad ugly goes with staff too. You might be working with some guy you hate, you can't stand him, or a female officer, or it could be any of that stuff, or staff person you're like, I hate this person, I can't stand him, I don't want to be around him. You get into the whole mentality of that person's a rat, they're going to go tell on me, all these different things. And that's the ugly part of working in corrections and in prisons is, sometimes the staff are worse than the inmates. And the staff, they will do, messed up things to you, stab you in the back. There was an old saying back in the day, don't worry about the inmates, worry about the staff. Because the staff are worse than the inmates at times. And you got to be able to, filter through all that and learn how to decipher all that, because you're working with people that get jaded. When you work in a prison correctional facility, you get jaded, man. You see so much shit, and you see so much ugly, and so much negativity is just pumped into you every day that you get so jaded sometimes, and you think, man, is this the way the world is? But the thing about it, working in a prison, you can't look at the extremes in prison and think that the world's like that, because it's not. Because prison's like bad behaviors and stuff like that are like on steroids, and you can't look at an inmate who may be flamboyant or maybe violent or maybe whatever and think that's the way everybody is, because that's not true. That's just not true, because you just have so many extremes in prison that everything's hyper exaggerated in prison. Things are just so hyper exaggerated that if you live your life thinking this is the way it is out in the real world, you're wrong, and you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot, because life's not like that. And the good, the bad, and the ugly working with inmates is just something you got to process, and you grow over time. If you've ever worked in corrections for a long period of time, how you come into corrections and how you leave corrections you'll be a different person, because you've seen it all. You've probably been involved in all kinds of stuff, and you know that you survived. And surviving's the name of the game. If you can leave your shift and go home that night, then you've had a good shift. So, we'll just want to leave it on that note that, a successful day is a day when you get to walk out. Nobody got hurt, nobody got killed, nobody got stabbed, and you get to go home to your wife, kids, family, or whatever in one piece. And that's the most important part, going home safely. So, keep the comments coming. Give us more suggestions of what you'd like to see here, and we'll keep churning them out to you, because that's what we do here. We are a team of people that like to put out good content, but we like to put out the content that you want to hear about, not what we want to hear about, what you want to hear about. And we'll keep the stories coming, we'll keep the subjects coming, but you just keep feeding it to us in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, and always stay on the other side of the cell.